Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Wise Mind Fireside Chats, the Wi-Fi chats. Still in attendance, Stacy Anderson and Erika Nadu, and we have decided we're going to talk about judgment as condemnation because when we judge from a place of ego, we are basically putting value judgments on people, on friendships, on relationships. And one of the worst places in the world, Erika points out, is judgment in the family. Over to you.
Well, I didn't expect that introduction, but yes. Just in our little talk that we were having, I think it starts at the very beginning. It starts in the safest place that we know, most of us, right? Those of us that are fortunate to have a safe family home. There's judgment inside of there. So it's almost like you can't escape it. And some of it might not be delivered in a way that comes from a bad intention, but it still lands as judgment, which can serve to, start making you doubt your own decisions, not trusting your own thoughts and the processes that you go through to, discern and make your own decisions because somebody or something is putting a judgment on you. And sometimes it's not always verbal either. Like it doesn't come directly out. It can be a look. It can be just a tone of a voice, like a movement of the eyes. Like you can feel and sense judgment in all sorts of things. It's insidious in there. It's like it snakes its way in and destroys. And then you judge yourself, which causes you to then put judgment on other people going forward, right? Because the harsher you judge yourself, the harsher you will judge others.
Absolutely. The more rigidly we judge, the more harshly we judge others, which leads to even less room for our own growth, even more uh, self criticism about the mistakes that we make, and sets a blueprint potentially for the rest of our lives of looking for flaws rather than looking for positives. I know we shouldn't necessarily judge things as good or bad, positive or negative, but if we're going to look for flaws through training and nurturing instead of people's positive aspects, it sets us on a negative path from the start. So, what do you think, Stace?
Yeah, see, I took the judgments that was put onto me as truth. So what they thought about me was what was actually me. So the religious group that I was brought up in, were on about that says to my mum that our family was wrong. She wasn't doing the religion properly. She wasn't married into the religion, so she was going to go to hell. I was told all my days that I was going to go to hell because we we hung about with people outside the truth as well, and that was frowned upon. So I just felt like everything I did was wrong, and it also spilled into school. Because I was in this religious sect, my peers were calling me a Bible basher and everything like that, and I should be going to hell because of what I believe. So I've got this side telling me I'm going to hell because I'm not believing enough, and then I've got this side telling me I'm going to hell because I believe in it. So for years, I just thought I was a really bad person because these judgments were put on us, not just me as a person, but us as a family. So I didn't see the judgment at home very much because it was so dominant outside the family. That was where I got most of my trust issues was in the school and from religion. So it's it's a hard lesson when you see yourself not as how they judge you. And it can have such a knock-on effect that you believe these people for so long. And then all of a sudden it's just they were just coming from their perspective. there was no truth in what they were saying. So I'm very, I'm very dubious with people who tell me I'm doing things wrong now. It's like, what perspective are you saying that from? And in what facts are you coming to me with this from as well? So it can be a harsh lesson sometimes.
I think condemnation comes from a place of superiority, and what you're talking about there is this belief that somebody else, and an external authority, understands more about our decisions than we do. Erika was using an example of like the way you dress, the way you go out into the world, and it's just that person's perspective. Like, oh, I wouldn't keep it to yourself. How does it serve? Especially if it's from someone that we have given a position of authority in our lives.
Yeah, my son was when he was at school, there was a kid who was always getting in trouble. And he came home and he ripped this kid apart. And I was like, but how do you know he's not got a reason for doing that? Yeah, I don't condone what he's doing, but how do you know there's not a reason? Well, it turned out I knew the kid and I knew the kid's family. His grandma's dying of cancer. His auntie was getting beat up left, right, and centre with her boyfriends. His dad abandoned him when he was 9 years old, and his mum wanted nothing to do with him when he was born. So he had all this stuff going on in his head. So as soon as I mentioned that, I made that aware. I says to Brandon, instead of seeing what's in front of you, look at what's behind you or behind them. There's always a reason that they behave the way they behave. It's no good in us. Like what also comes with with judgment is labeling. You're labeled a certain way if you don't act a certain way because these people have judged you for acting that certain way. And people can spend years stuck in this label because that's the way people saw them.
I think the biggest problem with judgment is the damage it does to us as individuals, right? We talked about this before it came on, how it destroys your own trust within yourself, right? Your own ability to trust yourself when you have this huge amount of judgment that's placed on you, whether it be about how you dress, who you pick as a romantic partner, how you parent, what you're eating. I don't know. I mean, judgment is everywhere. Like literally everything that anybody does, someone else may find something to judge about it. And then the damage happens because you listen to it. And like you said, Stacy, it becomes the truth. Like you start thinking, well, maybe they know. And you stop listening to your own internal compass. It's like, oh, okay. And then once your internal compass gets louder and wants to be heard, then you don't know what to do. It's sort of like, I'm confused. Do I trust this? Because this voice, like, where did this voice come from? I've never heard this voice before because these voices are so much louder. So that's the real damage, I think, is getting to become acquainted with your own voice. Like, that's not, if I wore something, right, and I was told, you're going to wear that. Okay, I guess I'm not. Meanwhile, it's like, well, I picked this for a reason. That must be because I'm comfortable in it. And I felt like it was a good choice for me. But you're telling me in a way that it's not. So maybe you're right. It's the beginning of me not trusting that I know how to look appropriate. So how is that going to affect me going forward? I'm going to not have any confidence going out in the world. I'm not going to find strength in just showing up, right? It can really, really shrink a person down if we allow the judgment that people are placing on us to be truth.
Yeah, I had a friend who was in a mixed race relationship, public servant, law enforcement, and her peers made it clear to her that they were not happy with the choice she'd made. You just mentioned, Erika, about romantic relationships. She had the strength of character to say, I don't give a one. Um, and, being in law enforcement, one night she comes to call for urgent assistance, and none of her team turned up. They expressed their disapproval by not coming to her support, and as a result, she took a good beating. She was beaten black and blue by a couple of ne'er-do-wells, and there's the potential there to drive a wedge to create a choice. Well, what do I do? Do I risk this happening again, and I go with the peer pressure, or do I stick with my integrity, my authenticity? And I'm, happy to be able to say that she did, and they went off and made a wonderful life elsewhere for themselves, where there was not none, but less judgment, less criticism. And by creating this divide and maintaining this divide, we do nothing but cause hurt and pain for others.
I'm sitting here and I'm, because judgment starts young, like we said earlier, starts in the formative place, family, parents, siblings, whatever, the people we spend most of our time with in school. But as a child, you don't know, you can't define it as judgment, like, oh, I'm being judged. It's just something that is happening that doesn't feel good, right? So it makes you feel an emotion, sad, angry, whatever. And as children, we either act out or we internalize and hold it all in. Either way, not healthy ways to deal with it, but we can't define it. We don't know that this is what is actually happening until we get older and we become young adults. And then we become more aware of the being able to say, you're judging me, I'm feeling judged. We either can then decide, if we have the capacity, to not allow it and start establishing boundaries, but we wouldn't know how to do that if we're not taught that we're allowed to do that to stop the judgment, or we take it on as truth, like we were just saying, and it sort of forms who we are, which keeps us being really authentic. It takes us completely out of being authentic to who we are as people. We start showing up in ways that aren't us. We either do things to get the approval of other people, so we stop feeling that judgment, or we continue to act out and do things, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Well, you're going to judge me for that, so then I'm just going to do it anyway, kind of thing. So I think what we do here is, the hope is to reach people who might be feeling judged for some reason by somebody, by the people they love the most, and not know what to do with it, right? And I guess it's just to bring awareness to the fact that you have a choice. You do not have to allow that to become the truth for you. The gospel by which you now live your life. You can reach in and listen to that inner voice of your own and decide what's good for you and what's not. And if what you're hearing doesn't sit right with you, it's just an indication that you need to set a boundary around it and not accept it as truth.
We speak a lot about boundaries. We've done several standalone episodes on boundaries, and the key to forming boundaries, one element that we've discussed, is discernment. Discernment is a form of judging, but it comes from a place of assessment and seeking to understand. And we can ask ourselves, as Stacy suggested earlier, what has led that person to be where they are? What's the reason behind me and that person having potentially a press of our boundaries, which is completely different to just outright condemning them and saying, no, I'm, I don't want the opportunity to have meaningful connection with you based on the less kind version of judgment we're discussing. So how do we balance judgment, discernment, empathy, compassion?
I'm going to say, in all honesty, there are times where I could give two shits on getting to understand where you're coming from. That's my discernment process, right? I can then discern, and I have the choice to decide, do I want to even consider wanting to understand where they're coming from, or am I not interested? I'm allowed to do that also. Like, I don't have to try to, reach this place of wanting to understand everything everybody does. There are some behaviors and some things that I'm like, I don't care to try to understand what you're doing. I'm done. I'm just being honest.
Yeah, sometimes it's just learning to say, so what? If you've got an issue with me, if you don't like what I'm doing right now, so what? If you haven't got a direct link in how I do things, and then by all means, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm also entitled not to listen to it. But it's like you said, there's criticism and then there's judgment. Criticism, you can make that like constructive, but judgment is they're telling you that you're wrong. What you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is should be done their way, not your way. And again, that can have a knock-on effect, like Erika, you said about trusting ourselves. So we question ourselves. Why am I doing this? Is there any point in doing this? If I do this, will I do it wrong? So instead of actually just getting there and getting it done, we're too busy questioning ourselves and holding ourselves back, procrastinating, overthinking it, dissecting it, and then we go, what's the point? People are going to laugh and say, told you so anyway. But again, it's learning to say, so what? So what? Who cares? If these people are not going to be a part of the solution, I'm not going to make these people a part of the problem. It's as simple as that. I've been ruled by people telling me that everything about me is wrong for decades. 40 years until I realised this. And it's like, so what? You're not living my life, I am. And that's all it comes down to. I believe in what I believe in, and that makes me who I am. I'm not going to be anybody else. And see, once you realize that, that's when you learn to trust yourself a little bit more. We're not going to do everything the way other people do it. We are not capable of that. Even if we had a magic wand, we are not capable of becoming other people. We can only be ourselves. And if I'm too complicated for people, yay, I love that. And if I'm too simple for people, I love that as well. Because I'm not going to allow anybody to, and it's getting to that stage where you do kind of have, okay, just, I admire that you've got a thought and this is what you think about it, but that's not going to stop me. So, yeah.
I think being our own authentic self, and if that is too much for some people, that isn't a reason to hide ourselves. You taking on judgment, especially in those formative years where we, like Erika said, we don't have the knowledge, the context to rebuff it. Judgment is the start of all self-doubt, as you've pointed out. And, I just feel like I need to say opinions are like arseholes. Everybody has one, but you should be careful who you share it with.
True that. I mean, for me, I guess it depends on where the judgment is coming from. It's all about levels of access. I've said this before, right? Like if there are people that don't affect my life at all, if they have judgment of me, I doesn't register. It's like, I don't care. I don't care what they think because I don't care what they think. That's the bottom line. So not everybody will be able to affect me in that way, right? Because judgment's everywhere, but that doesn't mean that we have to take it all. Only the people that I care about, that I will even consider what the judgment is, right? But then the conversation is able to be had. Like, you're judging me and I don't like it. So it's a different way of dealing with the judgment. That doesn't mean that I'm letting it affect me and the way that I think about myself, but I can have a conversation then about what it feels like to be judged, depending on who you are.
Yeah, judgment for me says more about the other person because it can come from a place of jealousy. It can come from a place of fear. It can also come from a place of superiority. Nobody has got superiority in my life apart from me. And if they do, it's because I've let them. So becoming self-aware and finding out why this judgment has gripped us is more about us than what they've said. But when the judgment is first passed, it's more about them than about us.
I know we have to wrap up, but I'm wondering now if judgment is just a human quality. Like, it's just, we all do it. We all have it in us. This is a to be continued conversation because
I agree. Judgment is part of the human condition. That is obvious because it doesn't matter which group, what society you look at, there will be people within those different groups who will judge. There will be some who are wiser and exercise discernment. But ultimately, especially with things like appearance, what we say, how we behave, how we act, ultimately that comes down to submitting to somebody else's authority. And as we have all discussed in the past and know to be true for ourselves, we are the only authority on our own experience. And that is the thing that leads us to congruence and integrity. So we will wrap this one. Thank you again. All the contact details will be in the comments, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.